Welcome to This Explainer. Grab your historical detective hats because today we're investigating a truly mind-bending sequence of events. As a historian, I just find it absolutely fascinating how a deeply flawed, completely backwards artifact from the year 1525 managed to accidentally birth the modern concept of sovereign borders. The lines that divide our world today, the actual borders of our nation-states, have this surprisingly strange origin story, and the whole thing literally starts with a single piece of paper.
So, can a single, geographically backwards map actually change the world? Well, to figure that out, we have to travel back exactly 5 centuries to 1525. A printer named Christopher Froschauer, working out of his workshop in Zurich, published an Old Testament. But this wasn't just your standard, run-of-the-mill Bible. This was the very first Bible in history to ever feature a printed map. It spread like wildfire across 16th century Central Europe, completely revolutionizing how religious texts were illustrated. But, as we're about to see, being the first for sure doesn't mean being the most accurate.
Section 1. The Artifact Investigation. Lukas Cranach the Elder's Map. Now, Lukas Cranach was an incredibly celebrated Renaissance artist, but I gotta say, if I were a professor grading his cartography work on this specific map of the Holy Land, I'd have to give him a failing mark. The sheer absurdity of the errors is just staggering. For starters, he flipped the map entirely along the north-south axis. It's completely backwards. Because of that, he ended up placing the Mediterranean Sea to the east of Palestine instead of the west. And the landscape itself, it looks way more like a lush European countryside than the Middle East. He drew these leafy European-style walled towns, he made the River Jordan meander dramatically towards the Dead Sea in a way it definitely doesn't in real life, and he just went ahead and added totally fictional bays and coves to the coastline.
It's actually a pretty profound historical irony, right? A bustling printer's workshop published this major, groundbreaking document, and literally no one stopped the presses to say, hey, wait a minute, isn't the Mediterranean on the other side? Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire at the time, and this really drives home just how staggeringly limited Europe's actual practical knowledge of the region was.
Section 2. A Clash of Cartography. Science meets symbolism.
Okay, so how does a famous artist make such a bizarre map? Well, to understand that, we need to zoom out. We're entering an era where ancient symbolism is colliding head-on with cutting-edge Renaissance science. On one hand, you have the new scientific mapping revolution. Europe had just rediscovered the 2nd century Greco-Roman geographer Ptolemy. Thanks to the printing press, Ptolemy's precise methods, using latitude, longitude, accurate coastlines, and putting north at the top, were taking Europe by storm. In stark contrast to this, we have the old way, the medieval mappa mundi, like the famous one from Hereford circa 1300. These weren't about geographic accuracy at all. They used distance grids, usually put east at the top, and were entirely focused on conveying cultural and deep religious meaning. Now, those new scientific maps were rapidly replacing the old symbolic ones pretty much everywhere. But here is the fascinating twist. Palestine was the sole exception to this scientific revolution. European book buyers simply didn't want a modern scientific map of Palestine. They really didn't care about the contemporary Ottoman territory. What they wanted was a strange, hybrid, imaginative space. They wanted to see the places they heard about in church, a landscape filled with ancient biblical history that honestly felt more real to them than actual contemporary geography. So Cranach awkwardly mashed these two competing worldviews together to create a bit of a compromise. First, he drew modern Ptolemaic lines of meridian at the top and bottom edges, to make it look all scientific. But then he slanted the coastline so the northeast was at the top. And finally, he filled this supposedly modern scientific framework with entirely symbolic ancient journeys. Specifically, he drew the Israelites escaping slavery in Egypt, migrating through Mount Carmel and Jericho. He essentially framed a deeply spiritual journey within the rigid lines of modern scientific borders.
Section 3. The Birth of Borders. From Divine Promise to Sovereignty.
Let's move to the next concept, because this is where our investigation takes a huge turn, from a quirky historical mistake to a massive geopolitical shift. This strange, flipped map didn't just illustrate a story, it fundamentally changed how human beings conceptualized land and power. Take the number 12, for example. Cranach's map specifically divided the land of Palestine into 12 distinct tribal territories. This wasn't just some geographical choice, it was deeply symbolic. These 12 tribes symbolized Christianity's claim as the true heir of Israel. The map was quite literally drawing lines on the earth to communicate the eternal promises of God. And the crucial takeaway here is that transition. By explicitly drawing these rigid boundaries around tribal territories inside a highly revered text, the map normalized a very new, very powerful idea. Historically, lines on a map might have symbolized boundless, divine promises. But in the early modern period, these lines shifted. They started being used to mark out strict political borders between sovereign states. In a way, this Bible map set the agenda for all future cartographers. As world atlases gained massive popularity later in the 16th century, cartographers naturally followed this lead. They began dividing the entire globe into distinct nations with clearly defined borders. The fact that a map divided into strict territories first appeared inside the Bible essentially provided what was perceived as a religious authorization for a world full of borders. It took the modern, rigid political landscape and made it look like a divine mandate. Tracing this timeline, we can clearly see the incredible evolution we've been talking about. We go from Ptolemy's ancient science in the 2nd century to the medieval religious symbolism of the Hereford map around 1300, and then right into our catalyst, Cranach's 1525 hybrid Bible map. That single publication acts as the crucial bridge to the late 16th century, sparking the rise of global atlases that carved the world up into the rigid, sovereign borders we still recognize today. And maps in Bibles? Well, they were there to stay. Printers eventually standardized this practice into a perfectly symmetrical 4-map system. They included 2 maps for the Old Testament, focusing on wilderness wanderings in those crucial 12 tribal territories, and 2 for the New Testament, focusing on Palestine in Jesus' time and Paul's missionary journeys. This symmetry visually connected Judaism to Christianity. But far more importantly for our modern world, it forever embedded the visual concept of territorial borders directly into the most widely read texts in all of Europe. Which leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to end our explainer today. Think about the modern world, a globe carved up by precise, rigid lines denoting ownership, political sovereignty, and national identity. So, are these rigid borders the unintended legacy of a 500-year-old imagination? It's pretty fascinating and maybe even a little bit troubling to think that the very concept of the bordered nation-states we live in right now was catalyzed by a completely backwards, fictionalized map from 1525. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredible piece of history. Keep questioning what you see out there, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.